So the story goes, on February 22nd, 2026, I left my home state of Colorado and moved to North Idaho. 2 months later, I moved back. And at first I moved back to my parents' house in Eagle, Colorado. Then they sold the house 2 months later, and they moved out of the state. And now I'm in Montrose, Colorado. I've moved quite a few times in the past year, so it's been a very chaotic year for me. My life took a deep plunge into utter chaos. And in the midst of this chaos of moving around so much, I became confused. But it also changed me. I went from being a humble Colorado mountain town kid to a drifter, a high mountain drifter, a high plains drifter like Clint Eastwood in those old Western movies. But instead of hunting for bandits and bounties, I've been hunting for towns and places to live that have not deteriorated or that show minimal signs of deterioration. Because let's face it, most of this country is showing huge signs of deterioration. And it doesn't matter who's president, doesn't matter what political party is in charge. Many Americans, especially us young Americans, millennials and Gen Z, are struggling financially, economically, socially, and as a result, lots of us have seen our cities and hometowns deteriorate, myself included, especially since 2020. Life really hasn't been the same since then. It's been mostly a downward spiral into a complete dystopian mess. Whether it's the economy, the job market, the housing market, the dating market, the rise of AI, all of these problems. And this has caused me to start traveling and exploring to try to get away from the madness. That madness creeped into my hometown, Eagle, Colorado. Maybe not as much as Denver and the other cities in Colorado, but I grew up near the ski towns, and those parts of Colorado, the ski towns in the high Rockies region of Colorado, have developed some major housing and cost of living issues. And there's also Colorado being a sanctuary state, and in the high Rockies part of Colorado, you can see the results of that there, just like in Denver. And the thing is, I'm half Hispanic, but at the same time, it's like you're bringing all these people for cheap labor. It's like, it's not right, it's not ethical in the first place to even have them be pouring in here into the state. So I began to research other places to live, and I began to constantly study all these maps and data of various states, cities, and towns across the USA, looking for decent hidden areas, less talked about areas in the country. And in 2024, I began traveling to these cities and towns I was studying. First, I took a road trip to Northwest Arkansas. Then a few months later, I flew out to Southern Appalachia, to Western North Carolina and East Tennessee. And I explored that area 2 weeks before the notorious Hurricane Helene happened there. I'm very glad I did not choose to move there. I felt so bad for that place after that trip. You know, a few months later, I took another road trip across the Mountain West, starting in western South Dakota, the Black Hills region. Then I went through Wyoming, Montana, Washington, and Idaho. I ended up moving to Idaho. As I mentioned at the beginning of the video, I fell in love with it in the summer of 2024. And while it's not a bad place, and Idaho is a good state for the most part, it's not a bad state. But there were things about it that didn't suit me personally. I visited and fell in love with it in the summer, but I moved there during the winter. And they have some dark winters up there. Dark and gloomy winters. And I didn't fancy that. Then there's the strange economy up there, where most of the jobs are not in North Idaho. Most of the jobs are actually in Washington. 30 miles away in Spokane, Washington. Tons of people in Coeur d'Alene and Post Falls drive 30 miles west into Spokane, Washington, because that's where all the good paying jobs are. In Washington, where there's no state income tax and it's not a right to work state. And I didn't want to deal with that. Didn't want to put up with Spokane. It's a ghetto place. And I also didn't want to deal with the long, dark, gloomy winters up there. And after living there for a short while, I realized this place is only good for visiting during the summer. Because when it's not summertime, it is depressing up here. I don't really like it. But overall, it was economic issues that kept me from staying in North Idaho. Just like most of my home state, Colorado, North Idaho has big economic issues. Not just with the Spokanistan situation, which is what I call it, Spokanistan, because the place is really rough and ghetto. But it's not just the situation with jobs and Spokane and all that, but economic issues are also the fact that the cost of living up there is not actually much cheaper than most of Colorado. So I left North Idaho. It's an expensive place, and what I initially was looking for was a decent town with minimal signs of deterioration without it being ultra expensive. A cheaper place that's not super ghetto. And those kinds of places are becoming fewer and fewer here in the USA. I've been searching and searching, but in the process, I've just become a drifter, a traveler, an explorer. I feel like Odin in the Norse myths, who's constantly traveling the 9 worlds in search of more and more wisdom. And meanwhile, I'm here on Earth as a mortal human, constantly traveling and exploring, constantly searching for more and more nice places to live. But no matter where I look here in the USA, I see more or less the same thing. Life deteriorating. Most of the cities have deteriorated. Lots of crime, drugs, and homelessness, and so forth. There are smaller cities that haven't deteriorated as much, but after visiting many of them, to me it looks like a lot of those nicer, smaller cities are just going the speed limit when it comes to deteriorating. It's like, they have not deteriorated yet, but in 5 years it'll likely look just like Chicago or Los Angeles, Seattle, Houston, and all those other cesspools. And this has compelled me to start visiting other countries, thinking that perhaps what some millennials are doing with the whole geo-arbitrage lifestyle is the way forward. If you want a good life, to leave the country behind, but still make money in the country, remotely. And I started to do this a little bit. I went and visited Spain. As you can see from one of my previous videos, I explored Spain last year, and it was a great experience. And it was a much different experience from anything here in the USA. Definitely a worthy trip, a worthy exploration. And I certainly had a short honeymoon phase with it. I wouldn't move there though, because Spain has a lot of the same problems that the USA has a lot of the same problems that most of the Western world has. And there are better countries to be an expat in, to do the geo-arbitrage thing in, to be a digital nomad, expat, whatever you want to call it. But overall, all of this traveling and exploring, both here in the USA as well as internationally, has led me to 2 conclusions. Either I stay living in a small town, a small, boring town that's not an overly expensive ski town like the one I grew up in. Either live in a small, boring town and strive to live off the grid, or I move to another country and live the expat geo-arbitrage lifestyle. There's these 2 paths these are the 2 conclusions I've come to, these 2 different paths. Some people say the new American dream is to leave it. But at the same time, there's also the idea of living off the grid in a boring town in one of these boring states. These are the conclusions I've come to, because it seems that the whole country's falling apart. The entire USA is falling apart. It's falling apart just like Argentina in the late 1990s, like Venezuela. There are many other examples. But that's what I see. That's what I'm seeing. And in a country that's fallen apart, the best place to be is off-grid. The best kind of life to have is off the grid. To become as autonomous from the system as possible. If you want to stay in that country, if you don't want to flee it. And the best places to live off the grid here in the USA are the boring towns, or right outside the boring towns, in the boring states. States like Iowa, Missouri, Oklahoma, Nebraska. I know some of those states have fun things to do, but most people have always generally considered those states to be the boring ones. Whereas states like the one I'm from, Colorado, are not so boring. Traditionally, it's never been considered boring because of the mountains, but it's certainly an annoying place to live now, and a dystopian place to live now, for the most part, most of the state. Like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, now I'm in Montrose, Colorado, which is considered a boring town in Colorado. By Colorado standards, this is a boring town. And remember, I was looking for a place that's decent, but not overly expensive. Montrose seems to be that place, I think. Now, I'm a new resident of Montrose, but perhaps it is the place I was looking for. I didn't have to actually go on all of those trips that over the past 2 years, because I took quite a few road trips. I've been to many parts of this country now. Was it all in vain? Was it all for nothing? Did I waste a lot of money? Because all I truly had to do was just come down here to Montrose, 3 hours away from my hometown. I didn't have to go to Northwest Arkansas and up all through Montana and Idaho. I didn't have to move to Idaho. Could have just drove 3 hours down here and moved to Montrose. Because this place is decent, it's a nice, clean town, and it's a boring town, and it's not overly expensive. Now, if I tried to live off the grid out here in Montrose, it probably wouldn't be so easy. It's probably a challenge because it's very dry out here, and Colorado has more regulations compared to other states when it comes to homesteading and living off grid. But it's far enough away from all the chaos going on in the cities in America that it's a pleasant place. It's a decent place. And I'm just sitting here in Montrose like, what the hell just happened over the past 2 years? Was all this worth it? Traveling like I have? Becoming this drifter? I'm at a point right now where I'm ready to settle down for a while. Here in this boring town called Montrose, which I think is a nice place, but by Colorado standards it's boring, and most other people would consider it boring. But it's not super ghetto, and it's not super rough. But this is the type of place to be if your country's falling apart, if everything's going to shite, and yet this place is not that far from where I started all these travels. It's not that far from my hometown, which is why I'm wondering, were all my travels in vain? I don't want to think so. I don't want to think so, because going to all those places, Northwest Arkansas, East Tennessee, Idaho, it's broadened my perspective. You know, I've actually seen places for myself. I've become a drifter, like Odin in the Norse myths, like Odin himself. I've become a wanderer. And if I didn't travel to all those places, I wouldn't have actually seen the world as much. And that's one thing that's worth doing with your life, is to go out and see the world, not just to stay in your hometown your whole life, not just to stay in one place your whole life, but it's worth it to go out and see places, to see the world, both in your own country as well as abroad. And when it comes to America collapsing and deteriorating, like I've been saying, and the two conclusions I've come to in order to prosper, in order to truly live a nice life, well, I probably wouldn't have come to those two conclusions if I didn't go on all of those trips, all those road trips, if I didn't drift for a while. But which option is better? Live off the grid or go abroad? I mean, for others, it depends on your financial situation. But for me, in my situation, being out here on the far western slope of Colorado, I'm starting to think more and more, why not both? Live in a small, boring town, in a rural town for half the year, and travel abroad for the other half of the year. Because leaving your country behind for good takes tremendous effort, and it looks like it's very challenging. But to leave for a little while, well, that's not so challenging. I sense that I am not done drifting. I mean, I found a nice spot here in America as it's crumbling, but I sense I'm not done drifting. There's a whole world out there that's worth exploring. I know that I'm rambling all over the place in this video now, and I'm probably not offering much of anything of true value with this video, but these are a lot of thoughts that I've been wanting to get off my chest, just speaking my mind and being totally honest with what's been going on in my life and what's been the result of all of these trips and travels and voyages that I've been on over the past 2 years. And all of it was done to escape my hometown that was falling apart, only to realize later on that most of the whole country's fallen apart. And who knows, if I travel abroad more, perhaps the entire world just falls apart. You know, who knows? But I found a place to settle down for a little while and express what I have learned over the past couple of years. Things are getting rough and tough here in the USA. And what I found is that as things get rougher, the two best solutions are either detach yourself as much as you can from the system in this country, live amongst the trees, or leave the country and do the expat thing. Anyway, I shall sit here amongst these trees in silence now for a little while. And I'll be back after a little while. Peace out.